Yo, what is going on, deities? Hope everyone is having an amazing Friday, and welcome to another edition of Titan Talk. I'm Isiah, got Killgoon with me as usual, and we brought back Lermy, so chat, you know what that means.
It's Lermy's balance bit.
So yeah, we've got a lot of balance that's going to be coming up in the closed Alpha 8 update proper. So nothing planned for any hotfixes over the weekend, but when closed Alpha 8 does launch early next week, we've got a good amount of balance we're going to be before in that update.
More than good.
Yeah, more than good.
A great amount of balance.
It's a great amount of balance, yeah. And before we get into it, we have some charts for Max that we'll go over, show everybody kind of what we've been seeing since closed Alpha 7 launched with the new God releases, how everything is shaken up. Before we get into patch notes, everything is kind of in progress, subject to change. We are bringing it to you early because we want to hear your feedback before Lermy goes back to her desk and locks everything in.
Immediately after I'm done with all the stream stuff today, I will be going back in and making these changes. So we're bringing this to you early, so things are subject to change based on what your feedback is, especially. So I'm very excited to see what you guys have to say for this stuff. And again, like we said, things can change, but these are our general proposals and how we got to those proposals, because of course, like you said, we got those charts from Max that we're going to go over, so hopefully there's a lot of cool data there.
Go ahead and bring up the first one. So this is God performance from November 28th to December 5th. So Lermy, walk us through what we're seeing here.
Well, we've got a lot of people in the center. There are two very big outliers, so in two different ways, as I'm sure that you guys can see. We've got Nuwa at the top, who is relatively popular, but is winning a lot, like a lot. Yeah. The next highest is below 55%, and Nuwa is above 60%. So you will be seeing a big shift up to Nuwa here. I think it is very important to note that, Nuwa is not perceived as the most OP character, otherwise she'd be a lot further to the right on the popularity chart than she is. But again, she's still a popular character. People love playing Nuwa. So we will be adjusting her specifically. Another one that you will see is Poseidon on the docket as well. Poseidon, I think, had a very, I'm going to say, tumultuous release, just because he had a lot of power in his kit. And so what we're doing mostly is to bring him a little bit closer to SMITE 1 parity in terms of his cooldowns, in terms of that kind of thing, because he did get a very big change to Trident and Whirlpool, especially going into SMITE 2. So we want to bring those back to those higher numbers that feel a little bit more fair, like players are used to for Poseidon specifically.
Yeah, and I will say, this is Conquest results.
Yes, exactly.
And some gods we know perform very well in a pro setting, like Umoja, the Morrigan, right, are better at the highest levels of play. But until you get to like the top 1%, we don't see that, right? So it's just kind of going with what the actual numbers are that we're seeing in the game. The other thing I'll just call out, because I say this every time we look at one of these charts, is that this chart goes from 40% to 60%. So everything is, more squished than the chart makes it look. Yeah. We just zoom in on the chart so we can see better what things are actually like doing in relation to each other.
And honestly, the majority of characters are sitting in that like 45 to like maybe 53% spot. So in general, I mean, we're pretty happy with the win percentages across the board. We do want to shift up the popularity numbers in some of those guys to the left of the chart, because as you'll see, the y-axis is how much that they're played, or sorry, y-axis is how winning they are. X-axis is how much they're played. So want to move them further to the right if we can, but you will see some adjustments specifically more focused around that higher level of player, even in ranked. We do have ranked information, of course, but we're not showing that today. This is for casuals. And that's mostly due to us being having CA8 be one of the patches that we're considering to play Vegas on. So that is going to be really important for the pros to be playing with, characters that they feel are balanced. And even if the stats are a little bit different here compared to what they perceive, we want to make sure that their experience is still feeling really good and really fun. And they get to put on a really good show for you all, because it's going to be a very exciting event. I'm going to make sure that it's, at least pretty well balanced for that.
All right, well, that's God performance. Let's talk about builds, shall we?
Yeah, this is another very interesting chart because we have a lot around the average again, and then poor Neath, strength-based Neath builds, just so far down.
Yeah, don't build that. That is a bad idea.
And then Nuwa and Poseidon again stand out to being some of the best. We've got Izanami as well up towards that left-hand side, upper left corner. So not the craziest builds to be perceived, but if you keep in mind that, you know, all the rest of these guys are in this like smaller box, and then of course you've got some of the like outsiders popping over in their various directions, that is another standout. In general, though, I think the perception is that Izanami's good. She's not OP, broken, instantly needs nerf, though, because, again, she is still sitting past that center line of less played. Yep. But, yeah, those are really our standouts. I hope that there's some more interesting information on there for you guys to check out your favorite god and how they're doing. And, you know, maybe you'll see a lot of these characters in the lower left get a couple of buffs and in the top right get a couple of nerfs. But, again, those spots on the chart aren't everything. That's not everything that goes into our balancing process. Of course, perception comes into it a lot. You know, what does the community think is good in terms of gods and builds and items, and does this item build getting nerfed affect this god being good? And there's so many other like smaller little tidbits of details that go into you know, making the balance all flow together.
Exactly.
So these charts aren't everything, but hopefully they give you an insight as to what kind of data that we're seeing.
Yeah, cool. And this chart in particular is just the 40 most popular god builds, right?
Yes.
So it's not somebody said Bologna's not on here. I think Bologna's probably just doesn't have one of the most popular 40 god builds right now in the game. So it's the reason why she's not on the chart.
Yes. You could also see multiple gods in multiple places on this chart, on the mostly due to them having hybrid builds or a tank build and a damage build, things of that nature. If you see the little different icons, they have different colors based on what kind of build they are or if they're a tank build.
Cool. All right. Well, shall we start reading off some of the proposed balance changes for closed alpha?
Yeah. And again, I will remind you guys that we are really interested in your feedback, so feel free to drop any of your thoughts in chat. I know a lot of these things will kind of be interwoven, so definitely try to, you know, save any particular higher level thoughts in terms of like the overall picture until we see most things, and I'm not gonna say everything because, you know, things are kind of grouped in interesting ways, but we are going to start going through them.
All right, let's go ahead and bring it up on an internal doc today, chat. Once we get everything locked in, we'll prep the notes on the website. You all will be able to read those. I think the plan is to go over full closed alpha 8 update notes on our Monday show, where we talk a little bit more about some of the new features and stuff like that in closed alpha 8 alongside the balance. But let's kick things off with gods. We've got Anubis up first.
I was just say, like, are there any kind of like overarching goals that we're going to see repeated throughout the? Okay.
Yeah, so in general, when we talk about gods, we're trying to nerf the top performers in general, right? So I think you'll see a lot of those guys up there. There are also a couple smaller CC nerfs on there because, again, it's come up a lot that CC is still really impactful, so we want to try to continue to push it in a direction where we can either bring the numbers a little closer together or just overall kind of lower them to make sure that, you know, gods still feel like they are giving themselves impactful CC, but they're not, you know, ruining the experience too much for other people, especially in a one relic world. And I know that we talked about that previously, about how we're intending to stick to that. So we want to make sure that, again, people are feeling like I can manage the CC. Like it feels manageable. That's really kind of the end goal, is to have the defender feel okay, right? Of course they're getting CC'd, so they're not going to be happy, but we're hoping that they're feeling okay and it's not feeling too bad for the person attacking as well.
All right.
But
Anubis up first. Mummify, decreasing the stun duration and decreasing the initial damage scaling on Death Gaze.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of Anubis. He's been very surprisingly popular. I think that he has kind of this potential that has started to show in a, I guess, realm with fewer god options available, especially because the majority of your like typical mid laners aren't super safe. Anubis is really one of those characters that can kind of plant and do a lot of damage. So he tends to be a very popular choice for that reason. He also just, you know, got a couple of buffs to really feel very impactful, and especially since the change to Plague of Locusts, where he could move a little bit faster, that feels real nice as the Anubis, but it's also made him feel very strong as well. So we're taking down Mummify to, again, kind of touch that CC, and then Death Gaze's Burst is the kind of next thing in the line of damage nerfs for Anubis to get him more in line.
All right, it's time to talk about Baron. I feel like we talk about him every time you're on the show, Lermy.
Yeah,
but Baron Somni seeing some more nerfs. So
exactly.
Consigned Spirits going to be decreasing the damage, Wrap It Up, increasing the cooldown, and then Life of the Party, we're going to be decreasing the Hysteria applied per tick and increasing the cooldown.
Yeah, exactly. So Baron is getting a couple of nerfs here, and you're probably going to wonder, well, Lermy, he's really strong because of cooldown, and cooldown is so good. Well, my friends, listen, we'll get to that. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Cooldown is definitely going to be seeing a pretty big adjustment in the item section, so a lot of the reason that you're not seeing cooldowns here for Baron is because we're affecting that in another spot. But I am really hoping that a lot of these changes are going to kind of bring down the potential for Baron to kind of be super frustrating with a lot of frequent rapid ups, with a lot of base damage, and as well as life of the party. There was a lot of discussion about how the CC is just really strong. It lasts for over 3 seconds, the Vortex at least, and you're getting pulled in a lot faster when that Hysteria builds up. So by decreasing how fast the Hysteria builds up in the ultimate itself, you need to make sure you do your combo first now before you actually start the pull if you want to get that stronger pull.
Cool. All right, Cupid up next, one of our newest additions to Smite 2. Share the Love. We fixed an issue where this ability's post-fire was 50% longer than intended.
Yes.
That's pretty long.
Yeah.
It was a lot longer than it should have been. And this was mostly due to the animation kind of lining up in a particular way. He was stuck in a post-fire until the explosion on the ground finished for Share the Love instead of when he's like done doing his action. And so usually we'd stop the post-fire when the character's done, but Cupid was throwing it and then he was going back to normal and just like sitting there. You couldn't do anything for a while. And so we fixed it to be when he's actually done throwing, you now are able to move again.
You feel a lot more responsive after using Share the Love for sure.
Exactly.
All right, moving along to Danzaburo up next. Getting a buff, Tanuki Trickery. We're going to be adding 55% strength damage scaling to the buffed basic attack after transforming, and then decreasing the cooldown.
Yes, exactly. So Tanuki Trickery is kind of the one ability in Danza's kit that didn't have strength scaling still. And if you check back at those charts that we showed earlier with builds, Strength Danza is doing way worse than Int Danza. They're both not doing great, but Strength Danza is considerably worse. So we wanted to kind of add that strength element back to Tanuki Trickery to make sure that no matter what your build is, you are still feeling like that's a really powerful ability. I know that especially for our, more power building, power focused builds, going something like Hi-Rez or Poly is really, really fun.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that both of those options are available to you, especially for this empowered auto, because doubling down on that feels really nice. And then just in general, it felt like his safety was a little bit too high cooldown in comparison to characters who have more immediate movement potential versus someone who's just kind of like juking around, being a little sneaky. It felt like this was a little bit less valuable of an ability for that reason versus, letting Danzaburo be able to move around really quickly, have that exciting effect to, be able to use it to, get some damage reduction on abilities, things of that nature. All of that's going to be really important with this buff. So in general, we're hoping that feels a lot nicer, that you can use it sooner.
Definitely. All right, moving right along to Hercules up next, going to be getting a buff. Driving Strike, increasing the damage scaling. Earthbreaker, we are increasing the damage. And then Mitigate Wounds, we are increasing the attack speed.
Yeah, so Hercules is a very interesting character because he is kind of performing a little bit closer to the middle of the road, but in general, we've been seeing a lot of strength-oriented solo laners not doing too hot in general in comparison to your Zeuses, your Anubises, your Ras, all of these kind of more magical characters ending up in that lane, building very differently than before. So we wanted to kind of make sure that these strength-oriented characters are able to also show up as well. And these changes in particular, Driving Strike and Earthbreaker, are partial reverts of previous nerfs to the damage, and the Mitigate Wounds is actually a buff to get it closer to what the attack speed was in Smite 1, because it decreased a lot going into Smite 2, but I know that it was kind of feeling very different for those players that are really used to having that attack speed, so we wanted to bring it back just a little bit more than it was before.
Bring it back in line just a tad bit. All right.
Just a little.
I see people in chat. Loki nerf finally.
Loki nerf.
Loki nerfs incoming. Vanish, we're going to be decreasing the damage scaling. And Flurry Strike, increasing the cooldown by a second.
Yep, so the damage scaling on Vanish is probably the most important nerf out of the bunch here, just because a lot of the top end Lokis especially are able to get these multi-vanish plays off, which is very, very cool. But it turns out that when you do this ability multiple times in quick succession, it's a lot of damage.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Back to back to back. So in general, we want to take that down a notch and make that a little bit weaker. And then Flurry Strike being on an 8-second cooldown is really, really strong in general. It's a very good clearing ability, and it does help out a lot. So this should slow him down just slightly. We don't want to take Loki off the map, of course, because he is still like one of the most popular jungles in Smite 2 at this point. So again, we want to make sure that Loki players aren't feeling too bad about their clear. So in general, just a slight decrease to the very high strength of that multi-vanish play, especially when those dots are stacking up over and over again. And then a little bit of a hit to the clear just for an overall bump down.
Cool. All right, Mordred is up next, a character we haven't really seen a whole lot of recently. He's going to be getting a buff. Blood Rage, we're going to be increasing the buff/debuff duration. And then Heart Slash, we're going to be removing the self-slow while channeling.
Yeah, so this is actually a very fun set of buffs for Mordred in particular, because Blood Rage is an ability that was previously 4 seconds, right? And so it has a lot of things built into it, between just the buff for yourself, the ability to go and debuff other characters as well, depending on your basic attacks. And Mordred is a character that, I'm not going to say spends a lot of time in animations, but he's got a lot of things that he can do in his kit. So we want to give you a little bit more window to play with that buff debuff potential, and especially helps out a lot because he gets the movement speed, he gets the protections. Yeah. It's really, really great to be able to kind of combine those things together and have a lot more time to be able to play with that. Heart Slash as well is a very interesting ability because we want the feels of this ability to be really great. We felt that the damage and the healing potential of this ability already felt really great. It was more so just when I use this ability, I'm feeling not very powerful. I feel like I'm just kind of stuck, and I'm just hoping that nobody kills me in this period. So hopefully a little bit more juke potential, just feels a little bit smoother to use this ability. And in general, we will revisit Mordred if he needs more than this, but more so for the utility side of Mordred versus just more damage over top.
All right, let's talk about Nuwa. As we saw, she's winning a whole lot, so she's going to be seeing some shifts here. So Mysterious Fog, we're going to be decreasing the buff duration. Clay Soldiers, we're going to be decreasing the health scaling. And then Shining Metal, decreasing the cooldown.
Yeah, so for this in particular, Mysterious Fog is definitely one of the most powerful abilities in her kit. It's kind of sneaky why, because you can walk into the fog and give yourself the movement speed even when you walk out of the fog, and you can give it to your allies. So this buff duration being 5 seconds, especially in a world where cooldown is really strong, and you might be saying, oh, these nerfs are a little bit light. Nuwa is another character that does get touched really heavily by a lot of these cooldown changes that are coming up, so we didn't want to go too heavy to double down on Nuwa because she is getting hit in other ways as well. So what you'll see here is the Mysterious Fog change to kind of decrease her team utility and safety a little bit, and then the Clay Soldiers have been an annoyance, I think, across the battlefield. You know, these big tough guys are kind of coming across, and I think especially since we did base stat adjustments previously, it was a little bit too heavy in that regard where they got really tanky, really fast, and we want to kind of bring that down a little bit so they still feel defeatable, surmountable versus insurmountable, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, we wanted to make sure that the perception was still lining up because, again, there's going to be a lot of, I'm going to say, heavy cooldown changes coming up. So Shining Metal is going down 1 second. This is parity with Smite 1 right now. And this is mostly to still feel like Nuwa is playable, is viable after all these changes because she is going to get hit so heavily, especially by the cooldown changes.
All right. Next up, another character who's been doing their fair share of winning recently, Poseidon.
Yes.
Trident and Whirlpool increasing the cooldowns.
Yes, and it's by a lot. As you can see here, they were both 10 seconds, and that is very, very strong, it turns out, when you have Whirlpool on a base 10-second cooldown. And even Trident, especially with things like Fatalis being really strong and being able to use it as an auto-attack cancel now, which is really cool and really fun, but also really strong. Yes. It also did enable his new +1 for a while, which is cool that people got to play with it a lot. But it turns out that new +1 is also really good as well. So, again, we're just going to bring him back to the parity of cooldowns with Smite 1, so this should at least be, in terms of what you start with, very, very similar to how you experienced him in Smite 1, but again with the +1s in Smite 2, and of course with all the item changes coming up as well. Yep.
All right, Sobek up next, going to be seeing a nerf to Charge Prey, going to be increasing the cooldown.
Yeah, I think in a world where we are trying to...
where Sobek plucks you.
In a world where... you are really concerned about trying to decrease CC, but it turns out there's a CC that you can't really decrease because it is a timed sequence. And by changing that time sequence, you change how Sobek feels, and we don't want to change how Sobek feels. It becomes really difficult to make this ability worse. The biggest tool that we have at this point is to increase the cooldown, so we're going to push him a little bit further in terms of the cooldown of Charge Prey, because this is one of his most powerful abilities. It's one of his escapes as well. So we want to just make Sobek a little bit less good at doing the CC thing, because he's very good at that.
Yes, absolutely. All right, next up, Susano getting a buff. Storm's Edge, we're going to be increasing debuff/debuff duration. And then Typhoon, we're going to be increasing the knockup height by 25%.
Yes, so this one is interesting, right? Because it kind of goes a little bit against what we've been talking about earlier. And there's a very specific reason as to why we're doing this. Storm's Edge, although kind of doesn't really go with that first train of thought, kind of is just this really cool new +1 for Susanoo that is really, really hard to do, especially because you're trying to weave in these basic attacks. The window just gets really, really tight. So we wanted to give players a bit more chance to interact with this new mechanic, especially when you're learning Susanoo for the first time. It's really important that you actually are able to have the space to get those autos and weave them in, basic attack cancel. It's really, really important to learn how to do those things, and it just feels really punishing now for people who aren't able to do it so quickly like our top-end players are able to do. And it also turns out that he wasn't performing super well, so it felt like a good time to do that. On top of that, Typhoon is getting a knock-up height increase. This is mostly due to it being significantly lowered versus SMITE 1. It's probably under half as much as it was in SMITE 1. So we want to bring it a little bit closer to kind of keep that parity and make sure Susanoo is still feeling like he has these really big impacts in team fights. And again, this is not nearly bringing it up to match SMITE 1. This is just bringing it a little bit higher to be closer to SMITE 1 and feeling that way. We've definitely had a lot of feedback that the knockup wasn't feeling as good. It wasn't feeling right. A lot of Susanoo players were like, I used to be able to time my 2 off of this, and now that they're down faster, it doesn't feel right. So again, it won't be exactly the same, but it will hopefully be feeling closer for those Susanoo mains that love that combo.
Yep, cool. All right. Next up is the Morrigan. Dark Omen going to be seeing a couple of nerfs here. So we're going to be decreasing the initial damage, decreasing the mark damage, and decreasing the minion damage on this ability.
Yeah, so the Morrigan is actually a very interesting character because she has some interesting cooldown shenanigans, with her ultimate. So in general, we've definitely seen a lot of power with her ultimate, but she is also kind of unpopular. And we know that there's a lot of Morrigan bugs. I mean, that's just kind of a given with a character as complex and as, feels critical as a character like that, and we are definitely trying to resolve a lot of those bugs to make that experience feel way better. And we definitely have hit some of those, and hopefully
for sure.
even more coming up soon. But I think regardless, one of the things that stands out a lot is that she has really good clear. And it's great that she's able to clear super well. I think especially with her passive, it does help out a lot. So we want to also make sure that her poke is still feeling pretty closer to standard, especially on the top end of things. Morrigan is honestly considered one of the best gods, if not the best god in the game for those really top end players. And again, we want to emphasize that this is a patch that is going to be really important for pro focus things because Vegas is, possibly being played on this patch, or a lot of the scrimming and other things going up to Vegas will be played on this patch.
I think they're actually going to be playing on the next. They're going to play on the one after that.
Well, they'll get a lot of time to scrim with a nerf Morrigan then. So either way, I do think it is going to be really important for them to at least get a small bit of nerf here, especially that minion clear is going to be really important so that she doesn't get as much free pressure over in that very first start of the game.
Cool. All right. Next up, Yamoja. Up next, another kind of pro-focused top-end god getting a nerf here. So Mending Water is going to be decreasing the shield health scaling from 5% to 3%.
Yeah, we recently did a change to this to change it, the scaling to max health from int. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for Yamoja to really want to focus into int, but she does want to increase her shielding.
Oh, yeah.
So it makes a lot more sense for her now to continue to build this kind of tanky style that she's used to going and then being able to boost the healing that way. However, 5%, it's pretty dang good. So we want to bring that down a little bit. And then we're also doing that adjustment to, the healing and things like that. We're also going to be bringing Shield Splitter, which I think we showed off on a previous Titan talk in. So that will be a good anti-shielding option that we'll go over in more detail a little bit later for you guys to use against Yamojas that you see, and also anti-heal just in general. Really good against Yamoja.
All right, and then last up for God, Zeus getting a nerf to Chain Lightning, decreasing the damage scaling by 10%.
Yes, this is actually really big because this is going to count for every single one of those chains that you go through. So in previous team fights, you were able to rack up a lot of damage because you're bouncing that Chain Lightning between a lot of people, and it's, again, doing a lot of damage. So 10%. Scaling, may not seem like all that much, but considering that, it's going to feel like a pretty big nerf, hopefully mostly around those player fights, and still feel like he has the capability to clear wave and jungle and things like that, because that was a lot of big concern around Zeus previously. So we are hoping that he feels less damaging.
Yes.
Damaging
less
is the word
shocking.
that I'll use.
Yeah.
Shocking. Ooh.
All right, so that wraps it up for Gods in CA8. And like you were saying earlier, Lermy, we've got a lot of stuff in the item department as well. So let's get right into it. Up first for items, Adriat Ring is going to be seeing a nerf, kind of in trend with a lot of other changes, I assume.
Yes.
Cooldown. It's a big topic right now. And so this is kind of the center piece of where a lot of these nerfs are coming from, is that this is a 650 gold item that is a tier 2 that builds into a lot of these really heavy cooldown items. And we previously were not able to really bring cooldown down a lot of items because this item builds into them, and we want to not reduce the stats past a certain amount on items. Like if I have a tier 2 with 15%, not 15%, 15 cooldown rate.
Yep.
It's always hard to shift that mindset between the games because 15 cooldown rate is pretty good on a tier 2 for 650 as well. It's a really good deal. The problem is that if you have 15 and you want your tier 3 to have 10, that feels really bad. So we don't want to do that. We want to bring the tier 2 down, and then if we need to increase a lot more going up to a tier 3, we just do that instead.
Cool. All right, next up, moving right along. Oh, another page. Bracer of the Abyss up next. Seeing a shift, we're going to be adjusting the recipe, removing the cooldown rate, and the passive now triggers on basic attacks in addition to abilities, and we're decreasing the basic attack damage per stack and increasing the stat count.
Yeah, exactly. So Bracer is an item that has cooldown on it. It was very weird that it had cooldown on it because the passive gives you basic attack damage. So it's kind of this, it toes this weird line of being a little ability focused because you need to use abilities to get the basic attack damage. But then it's also like, why am I getting basic attack damage if I need to use my abilities? It toes this really weird line of who is it good on? And so we wanted to kind of open that up a little bit, or give it a little bit more clear direction to where now you can do it on either basic attacks or abilities, but we're also taking off the cooldown rate because, again, it just kind of gave this item a weird identity. So instead, we're going to be changing that recipe to Killing Stone and Hunter's Bow, and we're also going to be giving it a lot more stacks, so you have the potential now to get a lot more basic attack damage if you opt into this item.
Cool. All right, next up, Breastplate of Valor, getting a shift here, decreasing the cost from 2,600 to 2,500, and decreasing the cooldown rate.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of a hopefully, crossing my fingers, 2 birds with 1 stone type of change, where I think in general, people have been kind of meh about a lot of these staple cooldown items like Breastplate and Jotun specifically. You know, in SMITE 1, they're super cheap. They're really affordable. You can slot them into your first item slot if you want to, and it's really nice to be able to get that cooldown online early. However, they went up in price a lot going into SMITE 2. They're sitting at about 2,600 right now. I think both of them are at 2,600 actually. So we want to bring that cost down while also taking the cooldown rate down as well. So hopefully we're bringing them at least a little bit closer back into that line. I know Breastplate, at least, I guess Breastplate and Jotuns now both have passives. So that is kind of the extra cost factored in to the difference between SMITE 1 and SMITE 2. But they're a little bit closer while still taking down that top end of cooldown rate. And I think especially we didn't want to leave Breastplate out of the equation, because if it's one of the only 25 cooldown rate items in the game, it starts to go, maybe my Zeus middle buys a little breastplate here. And that's, it's cool occasionally. When Paul does it, it's cool. When everyone does it, it's not cool.
All right. Moving on to the Hallmark cooldown item in SMITE. Chronos Pendant, going to be decreasing the cooldown rate.
Yeah, so in general, this is kind of along those same lines. We're actually really happy with where Chronos Pendant is right now in terms of that kind of filling that same void of like having an early cooldown option that you can slot into your build. That is a really cool thing that you can see as a difference between SMITE 1 and SMITE 2, is that there wasn't really anything like that outside of like Sands of Time for the, I guess mages in SMITE 1 and just mid laners or int users in general in SMITE 2. So we didn't want to change the cost because we were happy with where it's sitting at. It tends to be the more OP item because we're seeing a lot of int users be really, really strong. So we didn't want to do any sort of shift to it. It was just a straight nerf. Just take that down a notch. All
right, next up, Doom Orb seeing a shift. We're going to be decreasing the cost, decreasing the int, increasing the mana, increasing the passive intelligence and passive movement speed, but decreasing the passive duration.
So this is a pretty big shakeup. And I think some of you will be kind of surprised to see this because we haven't done another change yet, which is Gem of Focus. So we're doing a big change to Gem of Focus that will make this make a little bit more sense. But kind of in general, Doom Orb is a little bit undervalued, right? I think what we are kind of seeing is that Gem of Focus is kind of taking over the spot that Doom Orb kind of typically holds in a lot of these int builds. And honestly, it was kind of okay in Smite 1 because these items did both exist, because Gem of Focus was a starter item upgrade and not just an item that you could buy all the time. So because they're both present as available items, it makes it a little bit difficult to say, I would rather have Doom Orb versus Gem of Focus, or I just get them both and I'm really fast, which is cool and all, but I think it's a little bit more interesting to make sure that these items have unique spots that they fill, unique niches that they are able to feel good about. So I know that this is going to be like one of the like contentious changes in this patch, so we definitely want to hear what you guys think about it, but please, take a second and wait for us to get to Gem of Focus before you, fully make your form your opinion on these changes, because this goes hand in hand with Gem of Focus. So I want to get the full story in here before we actually, jump to any big thoughts on balance for this one. So again, we're shifting this to be a bigger movement speed oriented item, and we're taking Gem of Focus away from the movement speed path and giving it more of that pure cooldown route.
Yeah, cool. All right, up next we have a new item, Eros' Bow. We showed this off in the Wednesday Titan Talk show in-game, so if you missed that and want to see it in action in-game, you can check out that VOD, but it is a new item built from Hunter's Bow and Veve Charm, 2,300 gold, 300 health, 30% attack speed, and the active is you can mark an ally god for 10 seconds, and each basic attack that hits an enemy heals the marked god for 2% of your maximum health once per basic attack, and the cooldown is also 10 seconds.
This is going to be really, really exciting. Honestly, I could see this on a little Cupid support. I mean, I'm not going to will that into existence, but if you want to, you could.
You could.
Maybe even a little Umoja.
Oh, you could as well, yeah.
It doesn't proc on allies.
Okay,
so if you did try to auto-attack your ally, you have to hit an enemy with the basic attack.
Cool. All right, up next, Eye of the Storm, getting a new effect. Hitting an enemy god with the storm heals you for 1% of your max health.
Yes. So in general, we are seeing that Eye of the Storm is a little bit more popular after the last set of changes to make it magical damage instead of true damage. So it is better on tanks, especially the tanks that are opting into magical defense. However, it's still not very popular. And so we're trying to give it a little bit more of that, what's the word I'm looking for? Incentive to have players go in where you can actually go positive in health trade-off if you are being really, really aggressive and hitting a bunch of people at the same time. The Storm is decent sized. It's not humongous, but it's big enough to where you could hit 2 or 3 people in a team fight if they're grouped up enough. So it is a big trade-off to be taking a lot of health per second. But again, if you're hitting a lot of people,
if you're getting active,
by all means.
All right, next up, here we go. Gem of Focus, shift. Going to be decreasing the cooldown rate from 20 to 10. Going to be decreasing the passive intelligence per stack. We've added 5 passive cooldown rate per stack, but removed the passive movement speed.
Exactly. So Gem of Focus is, again, this item that has seen the very kind of core style of I use my abilities a lot, and I use my, I get to move around a lot. Again, we kind of talked about this with Doom Orb, where Doom Orb was kind of getting overwritten a little bit in terms of its core ideal, where there's just 2 of these items that make me go fast. I'm not really sure which one is better. I guess I just picked the cheaper one and the one that has cooldown on it. So again, this is only possible because we changed a droid ring to have the 10 cooldown. But again, this is a change that we know is going to be really contentious. It's going to certainly be something that we are interested in seeing your feedback on. It's definitely going to be different now, that's for sure. But you still have the potential to go up to 25 cooldown rate, which isn't possible anywhere else now. So it definitely has that upper limit of really focusing into the cooldown. If you want to go fully into that route, you still have the ability to do so. But again, the movement speed is the one thing that we want to shift a lot of that focus into Doom Orb.
And if you want to move, get Doom Orb now, right?
Yeah.
All right, next up, Genji's Guard getting a shift, decreasing the cost, and also decreasing the cooldown rate.
Yes, so this is another kind of place that we wanted to hit that cooldown rate to kind of bring it a little bit more in line with the identity from Smite 1, because this still maintains a lot of that passive that players know and love, but it is still just really, really strong in terms of having 20 cooldown rate on an item that previously only had 10% in Smite 1. So we're bringing that down a bit to make that feel a little bit better. But again, hopefully doing a similar shift to breastplate where it's cheaper now as well to say, you know, this item was chill. It just had too much cooldown, and now you can build it a little bit earlier.
Cool. Moving right along. Gladiator Shield, going to be decreasing the cooldown rate from 20 to 10 and decreasing the passive damage.
Yeah, so this is kind of, again, to switch up the feel between the too much cooldown on an item that previously didn't have so much cooldown in Smite 1, bringing it more back in line with that. And then also it was just doing a lot of damage, especially with the prot scaling on the damage. Prots are, you know, pretty standard for a lot of builds to be able to get and group into. If you really want to double down on those prots, especially because there are some characters that do get some extra prots and things like that from their abilities. So we're trying to just take down those places where we're seeing tankiness turn into damage. This is one of them that did it a little bit too strongly.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about Hasten Fatalis. This has been
a lot of discourse
an item
on this
that's had a lot of discourse for sure. Fatalis going to be seeing a nerf. We're increasing the cost, and we're decreasing the basic attack movement penalty decrease per stack from 33% to 25%.
Yeah, so this is a huge change for Fatalis to where you are no longer going to be able to completely remove your basic attack penalty. The penalty will be 25% will be the penalty that you'll be feeling, but it'll be 75% removed versus 100% removed now. So won't be going as fast, be a little bit harder to build into, not just free zoom across the board.
All right, up next, Heartseeker is seeing a buff, increasing the mana from 100 to 150. Is this just a fix to make sure that you're not losing stats when you upgrade from tier 2 to tier 3?
Yes, exactly. So this is kind of we know Heartseeker's good. It had a problem. We just wanted to fix that really quick so you're not losing any stats on upgrade.
Cool. All right, Helm of Darkness up next. Using the active ability now grants the Phantom effect to the owner for the duration.
Yes.
That's good. That's
we definitely had some discussion around Phantom Shell and just the, what's the word that I want to use? Like, amount of walls in the game, especially with Thor being added, just making a little bit more individual, what's the word, incentive, ability to get through them if you want to. So there's another good reason to get Helm of Darkness if you want to. It's a very expensive item for sure, but the counter is there if you want it for yourself.
You just got another option, right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the goal for the active items, right? Like, we need to have more opportunities for people to respond to things that they're facing, right?
Yeah.
And you shouldn't just be able to automatically answer any question that's posed to you. But if you want to opt into spending the money to counter build somebody, then you should be able to do that generally.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, up next, Jotun's Revenge, seeing a shift. We're decreasing the cost, but also decreasing the cooldown rate.
Yeah, so this goes back to the breastplate, etc., other changes where cooldown rate go down, cost also go down, gets us a little bit closer to that feeling that we had in Smite 1 of I get a cheap cooldown item. Not quite as cheap anymore because it does have that really cool new passive, but it is, bringing the top end of the cooldown down to hopefully make the stat a little bit less efficient everywhere, you might say.
All right, we got just a few more items left, I think. Phantom Shell going to be seeing a buff, decreasing the cooldown by 20 seconds.
Yeah, there was a lot of commentary about how this was the least popular active, aside from our good pal Sunder.
Yeah.
I think in general, Phantom Shell is still really strong in a lot of applications, but it just wasn't up when you needed it to be. And so 20 seconds might not feel like a lot, but 20 seconds over the course of a game really start to add up. And again, especially because there's so many walls in the game right now, I want the opportunity to be there when you need it.
Cool. All right, moving right along, Pharaoh's Curse, seeing a nerf, increase the cost by 100 gold, decrease the active slow, and decrease the active attack speed slow.
Yeah, so Pharaoh's Curse is another really popular active item. It does a lot. It is a very good debuffing item, and we want to keep that cooldown low.
Yeah.
Last time we increased the cooldown up to 60 seconds, and that feels like a good spot where you feel like you can do it once a team fight, twice if you're really lucky. But again, kind of going back to the CC feeling really strong, this was just something that we felt like was really impactful as a part of this item, that we want to kind of decrease the impact a little bit more of the CC versus, make the cooldown longer.
All right, we've got another new item that we showed off on our Wednesday show, so we'll go through it pretty briefly. Rod of Asclepius, 2450 gold, 65 int, 300 health, 3 health regen. Passive allies within 8.8 meters have 20% increased healing. And then the active, which is spicy, remove and prevent all anti-heal effects for 3 seconds for all allies within a 7-meter radius. And the cooldown is 60 seconds.
Yep. This is a really cool active.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had like an anti-heal counter.
No, yeah.
before.
Anti-heal.
Yeah.
Anti-heal. Indeed. So it's definitely there to have your pop-off heal moments, in an emergency where you're like, oh snap, I'm in an Odin cage. I need to, but I need to heal myself. Now you have an item that works for that. You also have a way to bolster your team's healing. So if you want to slam a Cupid, Umoja, Afro, Hercules, whatever you might want in a comp, it certainly will help out in that situation.
We need to
I
rethink
know,
this
right?
item.
Yeah.
I don't know. Suddenly I had
I
flashes.
know, right? I have regrets. Next up, Sands of Time seeing a shift. We're going to be increasing the intelligence, but decreasing the cooldown rate.
Yes, the cooldown rate was kind of the big thing, of course, where this is like the standard mid lane choice, although Conduit is generally winning a bit more overall. It just feels like, again, the cooldown is spread out too much, but we don't want it to get shifted down too much. We still want it to be a viable option for mid laners, so we're bringing the intelligence up by 5 to just kind of make sure, like, we're not trying to remove this item from play, but we are trying to bring cooldown down across the board.
All right. Then the last new item, Shield Splitter, we also talked about earlier in the show and on Wednesday. 2,600 gold, 40 strength, 25 of each protection. Then the active is you throw an axe and you split the enemy shield in 2. You get half of it, they lose half of it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting item, especially against your Umojas, your Phantom Shells, your Odins. There's so many characters that can, opt into that shield. I think even Amma is a good example of another character that this will affect. And, you'll kind of have it where even if you're not using it for a shield, it's a little bit of extra damage that you can throw in a team fight. It's not an easy shot to hit, mind you. It's still a skill shot. It goes out in a line, so you got to hit it. But when you do, it feels really nice.
You profit for sure.
And you steal the shield.
You steal the shield. It's good. All right. Soul Gem up next. Decrease the cooldown rate from 15 to 10.
Yeah, one of the most popular and winningest items in the game. Just getting a straight nerf, no adjustment here beyond that.
All right. Moving right along. Stone of Binding. Decreasing the health. Decreasing the cost and removing the health. Sorry.
Yes. So this is actually a very interesting item. This is kind of a relic of the previous component system that we had, where this item was getting health from a bunch of various other components that was building into it. Now it only has components that build prots, so we decided, okay, we'll take the health off. It was only 100 health anyway, so you're not really losing too much, but that means we also get to cut the cost by a lot as well. And honestly, this was a very unpopular item beforehand as well, but in general, we kind of wanted to not only buff it, but this felt like a good chance to fix it and then give it a little bit more push in the direction where hopefully people will buy it now.
Cool. All right. Another popular item that's going to be seeing a nerf, Talisman of Purification, just reducing the cooldown rate.
Yeah, so again, this is another hot item that it feels like supports are auto forced to buy a lot of times. We're trying to continue to adjust the CC as we go along. You've seen a couple of those in the patch already, but hopefully this will still be a viable item for those situations while not just being a source of really high cooldown.
All right. Up next, Void Shield getting a buff, increasing the passive physical protections. And we'll loop Void Stone into this as well, increasing the passive magical protections.
Yeah, so these two items are very unpopular, but we want to also make sure that anti-tank options are available for our tanks if you want to go into that. I know it's very, it's an interesting style to go a lot of various tanks. We've also been seeing that, sometimes tanks are played over in the ADC role or in the mid role and things like that. But we're not trying to say that that's not a viable strategy and you shouldn't do that, but we want to make sure that the counter option is available should you choose to go into it as well.
All right. Moving right along, and I believe this is our last item on the list.
This is the last one.
We did it. Yogi's Necklace seeing a shift. We're going to be decreasing the health regen, decreasing the mana, but there is a new effect. You heal 0.5 of your maximum health and mana per second.
Yes, this is actually a very exciting change because in general, for characters that aren't building into more max health, this doesn't change Yogi's Necklace at all. It's essentially around the same amount that you're going to be healing over time, at level 20 especially, but if you're opting into a lot more of that max health into your build, you now have a really interesting sustain option, kind of similar to Stone of Gaia from SMITE 1. I know a lot of people love to build that, especially in the Assault mode, so I think, especially when we get to see Assault, this might be a pretty solid pickup for your more tankier folks that you end up rolling into.
I played Assault this morning.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. I missed the Assault playtest. I got to hop in on one of those.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Sweet. Well, that is all the info for closed alpha 8 balance that we are working on right now. Again, subject to change.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and then there's
Oh,
one
yeah.
other
One-
kind
one
of
more thing.
big sweeping change that we don't
Yeah.
have the exact numbers to share on today.
Because it's a lot. Yeah.
Do we have the? Oh, he gave you a novel.
Yes, I do.
Okay, sorry. I just looked over and I saw your entire screen is full
Yes.
of text. So so go for it.
Let me just read this really quick to make sure there's not any
Okay,
information
I will
that I don't
talk
want
for
to
a
share.
while. Then. So
AJ touched it on Wednesday, though.
yeah, so basically we're kind of taking a bigger pass on all of the base stats for gods, and I believe largely the intent is to make like tanks and squishies feel more diverse.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite as diverse as they were in Smite 1, but a little bit more separated to where time to kill should be more what you would expect between the two different groups. And that's my non-designer high-level
TED Talk.
All
version
right.
of it.
I've had it read. I'm just going to read it because
Okay.
all the information
Okay,
is good.
so
Cool.
this is from Pon Pon.
Yes.
Yeah, so
We pushed class stats further away from each other, still more closer in spread than from Smite 1, but pushed it out more especially for mages, early health, and early physical protections. Additionally, we took the 15% health we gave in a previous patch, that's the per level health, and instead turned it to plus 10%. So overall, the per level health is going down by a small amount versus it's not going down by 5%, but instead of increasing it from those previous numbers by 15%, it's increased by 10% now instead. That's just how percentage math works. It's really weird, but beyond this, kind of the reason that we're doing this is these were as targeted as possible changes to address 2 points of feedback. The first one being that mages are really good in solo, and the second one is that health is just a little bit too highly, just a little bit. And so we're trying to kind of aim for the fact that mages should still be good in solo, but we were getting feedback that it was a lot of mages, your Raz, Anubis, Zeus showing up a lot over there, even Nuwa sometimes. So we're trying to make sure that they are less advantageous versus a lot of the typical warrior type characters that we were seeing over in there.
yeah, it should be a intentional choice with pros and cons to play a more mage-like character versus a more tank-like character. So hopefully this change pushes us more into that direction, and it feels good when you guys play it.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, like I was saying, that's everything that we've kind of working on and kind of planned. Again, nothing's super locked in yet. So if you have feedback on anything, go ahead.
I will add one other thing. Somebody in chat had mentioned Bologna several times. I will say this is not directly a Bologna-specific thing, but we have been investigating a bug over the past few days where basically any in-hand modifying ability,
Swap, essentially.
a swap,
Yeah.
causes you to attack slightly slower, or is it move slightly slower or attack slightly? I guess both.
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
The important part is that it might not be every ability you think it is. It's not every stim.
Yes.
It mostly has to do with particular abilities that change this is a little bit back-end terminology, but change the device that they're using when they are changing to their basic attack. So this affects people like Bologna, I know for sure, is someone that hits it solo, is another character that does that as well.
Jing too.
Jing. Medusa one is someone that we kind of first saw this change happen with because she gets such a big stim from her ability. It's kind of the reason why it was super, super noticeable and why we were able to dig into it in the first place. So big shouts to Haddix for that one. Thank you for sending that our way. And yeah, essentially, like you were saying, it's adjusting your attack speed and movement speed down incorrectly after the stim.
So it should be an indirect buff to Bologna in particular, since all three abilities are a new in-hand device
Yeah,
for
they
her.
all
So
changed that.
previously, after you use any ability for like 7 frames or something, you were moving and attacking slightly slower.
Yeah.
So that should just be an improvement to the way Bologna feels, and should also just make her perform better. So not a direct buff to her this patch, but definitely a buff.
Yeah, she was generally performing a little bit better in perception over some of the other warrior characters that we buffed, but Bologna is definitely on our short list of characters to keep an eye on, especially once we finish with this particular set of changes.
There's a lot of discourse in chat right now. We still want more role diversity. We want gods to be playable everywhere. The problem was, if a certain group of gods is just better at everything than another group of gods, then there isn't role diversity because you're just going to play that role, right?
Yeah.
So this change should actually increase the diversity again by making more things viable.
Yeah.
And everything just has its strengths and weaknesses, right? True diversity isn't just like everything is equally powerful. It's everything is powerful in a way and weak in a way, right? Otherwise, everything feels samey.
Yeah. Excuse me, exactly. So again, we're not trying to say you can't play mages in solo. We're trying to say that mages have stronger parts about them and they have weaker parts about them.
Yeah.
Those weak parts just weren't weak enough.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pros and cons.
Pros and cons. Indeed.
Exactly.
It's like, I think that's also part of the relic discourse, right? Is it's like, in Smite 1, people are really used to having an answer to everything all the time, right? And now it's like, you kind of have to make a decision at level 1, and then there's like some pros and cons to the decision you made. And if you have a relic that's good against a certain god, maybe you should be trying to pick off that god and fight that god. And if you're not as good against another god, then you can either buy an active item to try and counter what they're doing, especially like our new helm change,
There you go,
you know, or other things that we have that we're talking about. Or, you know, you can just like try not to fight them and run away, right? Like maybe it's not fun to run away, but it's a MOBA. Sometimes that's what you have to do.
Sometimes you just got to dip, you know?
So anyway, just a little theory.
Yeah. Cool.
That took us a little while. I think we should probably just jump through some questions
let's do it.
over the last like 10 minutes we got here.
Let's do it. If you guys have specifically balanced thoughts as well, please definitely keep them in there. I've been reading a lot of them, but if there's anything in particular that you guys really feel like stood out from that patch that you feel like you either don't like or you really like, either way, let us know in chat or even in the comments afterward on YouTube. We'll be able to check that out for the next couple of hours as well. Looking forward to it. But let's take a little read, eh? The chart at the beginning showed strength builds being consistently lower in win rate across the board, yet there wasn't a single strength item buff, ? This is mostly, we believe, due to the fact that int items are really, really good versus strength items being bad. We thought that a lot of the cooldown items that we touched specifically did have to go specifically for the int characters. I mean, Gem of Focus, Chronos Pendant are like two big offenders. Soul Gem is another one. So we also took down some of the top performing int characters as well. Beyond that, so we didn't necessarily felt like we needed to bring the strength items up a lot more. You know, there were a couple of changes here and there, like Jotun's is a good example of that, but for the most part, it felt to us that strength items are okay, but we felt like int items were really, really good.
Two quick answers. Question about PS5 Morrigan. I made a note to follow up on that. I think it should be fixed, but I'm not sure. And then there was also a note about should Mordred have int scaling on the Clarent version of his one, which makes sense to me from a logical perspective.
Yeah.
I am not a designer, something we can think about.
Yeah,
So
I'll bring it up.
we added support for DLSS, XeSS, and so on, which is great. Well, we add support for PSSR. PSSR is the PlayStation version of that. Unfortunately, to be able to support the PlayStation version of that, we need to upgrade the PlayStation SDK that we are using, which is a very large arc of work. This is also one of the reasons why we don't have a PS Pro specific version, is that we don't have the up-to-date version of the PlayStation SDK. We're, relatively up-to-date, but they kind of just put out a new one that enables the support for these things. So at some point in the future, we'll probably go back and we'll do the SDK upgrade, but we just have a lot of other really important technical things we need to get done first. And we feel like the PlayStation version of the game is actually at a pretty good spot. We're actually having some discussions today that like in certain ways, the Xbox version doesn't look quite as good as the PlayStation version right now. And so we're digging into that a little bit and seeing because Series X is actually just marginally more powerful than PlayStation 5. They should be almost identical. Like Series S is always going to look a little bit worse because it's slower. But we're looking into that a little bit and trying to get that sorted out.
I've been seeing a couple comments about Ares Ult, and we definitely had a lot of discussion about Ares Ult internally. We don't have a short-term plan for how we'd like to adjust Ares Ult, but we've been seeing a lot of the feedback around it feeling not as good, or it's missing a lot of those interaction points that were really fun and exciting for the Ares in Smite 1. So we're talking about ways to improve it for the future. Whether or not we go directly back to the Smite 1 version, I can't really say at this point. It will depend on a lot of different things, depending on how we can adjust it. But we definitely are seeing the feedback, and it's something that we're having discussions on.
There's a kind of a why is Medusa hybrid question, and just in general, hybrid hunters, do we think that that's working? Are there things that we need to do to make that better? Is it, again, just a problem with int items are too good? So
I think it's really cool that particular, characters can kind of do a variety of builds. I think a lot of the strength of the strengthening system is just being able to be so diverse. You have access to, technically, speaking, you have access to more items than you've ever had before. You can build right up to Hootie on Cupid if you want to now, which I think is a really interesting mechanic. But if you are only a strength scaler, only an int scaler, you're kind of back to the Smite 1 system, which for some characters works and makes sense, right? Like we talked about Ram before and how Ram is going to be an only strength scaler. I mean, you wouldn't really expect a character like Ram who's so reliant on those basic attacks to have much of any int scaling. But again, I think it is cool that we can really lean into the system to give you so many more options for build diversity. And for hunters specifically, I think it makes sense for there to be some more of those, even in Smite 1, right? More mage-like hunters, like Medusa, like Neith. And even Cupid kind of fills that role now too, right? So I think that having diversity in the kinds of characters and kinds of builds that you can go is not a bad thing. I think it depends specifically on the balance of those individual characters as to where those specific things stand.
There's a question here that reminds me of something from Wednesday that I'm going to talk about. Is Medusa's T-pose extra long compared to the others? So on Wednesday, everybody was saying Medusa's so long. Why is Medusa so long? So I mentioned it to our team, and I was like, did you guys make Medusa longer? Like everybody was really like concerned about the length of Medusa. And we had looked at it, and they're like, no, it's exactly the same length. And a lot of the animation, like the basic moving forward animation and whatnot, is essentially exactly the same, right? The reason why, part of the reason why we think she looks longer is because of the change in the UI. Because it's see-through at the bottom now where the abilities are, and it used to be black. And when it was like opaque, you couldn't see how far back her tail went. There also were some issues with like as you're strafing, like the blending between the animations wasn't looking good when we were looking at it on Wednesday.
We adjusted them.
Yeah, as I was about to say, met with the person working on that yesterday. DJ did a really good job, and those have been adjusted, and I think those should look better now. But she is no longer than she used to be, and we cleaned up the animations. So.
It's actually really funny because we did like have some interesting tech that we were testing with her where she was longer at one point. And when I started working on Medusa, I was like, guys, she's really long. What happened? Like legitimately her tail would go from the center of the screen to each end, and we were like, so why did we change this? And then they're like, we're just testing tech. And I was like, okay, cool. Feel free to use her for tech, but when she's ready to ship, let's make sure she's normal again. Just goes to show you that it is very fun testing out some of this new tech, and all of our devs have really enjoyed playing with a lot of the new systems to see what cool stuff that they can build.
This is a question that I think you would like answering. We have hybrid hunters and hybrid solo laners. When will we get hybrid mages?
Ooh, that is really exciting. I feel like I would love to make some of the abilities on mages hybrid. I know that we previously had it like when we had the split damage type before with physical and magical damage, which again, to remind everyone, different than what we have now, different than hybrid scaling. It is definitely a possibility that some characters could sit in that hybrid mage spot. A lot of the characters that we have right now do feel like really traditional int scalers. Like I couldn't really see Zeus being strike scaling.
I was gonna say Zeus is the only one I could because he throws them, right?
Yeah, I guess.
And like I don't know, because I was kind of similarly like I know Raigen's probably a long ways away, but like Raigen is a very like physical feeling mage, you know, because he hits the drums, you know, like I could see maybe there's, I don't know, like it's an interesting concept, but we definitely need to think about it and be like, is there a way we can get that?
I think it would have to make sense.
Yeah.
Like in terms of the character's theming, I think a lot of the reason why you see particular things have strength and int scaling is a lot due to the theming of the character. Like for instance, Medusa's got a lot to do with poison and kind of with this gaze, magic for lack of a better term. I don't know what you call that other than something
scary,
fantastical, terrifying. It's a horrifying Gorgon gaze in the description. But yeah, things like that where, especially for Cupid, I think as well, it makes a lot of sense where he's got these like very whimsical, very magical feeling abilities and effects where he drops this giant field and things of that nature. It makes, I think, sense for characters like that. Yep. I can't like think off the top of my head if it would make sense across the board for, you know, every ability on every character when it comes to the mages, or if there's one that really stands out. But I could definitely see particular characters having strength in that spot.
Oh, it's time for one last question.
Yeah.
One
more
more
question.
question. Sorry.
We have to do that.
We have another. There's another show right after this that
Yes.
Lermy has to do. So we kind of you have to end on time
Yes.
today. And I will. I will pick my first question immediately, and I will not take any more because I know that we're on a time limit today. Because I think it's an important one. It's can you consider shutting down Smite 1 and offering a strong incentive to the Smite 1 player base to come over? Perhaps a Smite 2 welcome pack with the gifting of some diamonds or legacy gems, a few skins, and some God Ascension tokens, etc. We have no plan to completely shut down Smite 1 at this point in time. There are a lot of people who are still playing Smite 1 who are on older consoles where Smite 2 isn't supported. They have old, slow computers that just aren't going to be able to run Smite 2 well. And also people have favorite gods and certain skins that they've purchased that they love that aren't coming over. And we don't want to make people leave all that behind, right? Our hope is that most players will move over to Smite 2 because already I think it's doing a lot better than Smite 1. There's obviously a ton of area for improvement, right? But like Travis, our GM, played a game of Smite 1 Arena yesterday to try and like feel something in a god that we're working on. And he was like, this is the first time where I'm like, man, I think Smite 2 might actually just like be better than Smite 1 because I noticed so many little things that were wrong with Smite 2. Travis is like the king of little broken things.
Frame by frame. Yeah.
And he was like, man, my list of things that were wrong in that Smite 1 game is longer than my list of things that is wrong in a Smite 2 game, right? So we think that we're heading in the right direction. The game is better. It's going to be good. And then the last thing I'll say is that like there's you should offer a strong incentive to the Smite 1 player base to come over. We're doing that through Divine Legacy, right? So there's a number of skins that you're getting just for playing Smite 1, plus a ton of badges that show off your progress in Smite 1, plus you're going to get all of your legacy gems, right? So you're getting free skins, you're getting legacy gems. You don't get free diamonds, but there are daily login diamonds. There's diamonds for leveling up your gods. There are a lot of sources of free diamonds in the game. So I think that like we try to make it as welcoming as we can, but we don't want to alienate people that still want to play Smite 1.
I've got a question. If there are no roles in Smite 2, such as guardians, mages, etc., why can't they all share the same stats then? Isn't that the reason they've been changed to strength and int? I would say there's a couple reasons. First off, does it make sense to you that Cupid and Ymir have the same stats? Just looking at them. Little baby guy, big ice giant.
Well, he is bigger than he used to be.
Yeah. He's grown up just a little bit,
a little bit older. But I think that's just like the most extreme example we have right now of like these two characters look really different. They feel really different to play. They should also have different stats. I think kind of the more gameplay reason why is so that your experience playing different characters feels different. Right now we have about 5 different classifications for like levels of stats outside of attack speed. Attack speed is like the one stat that we felt like this needs to not really have a specific classification and stay very similar, if not exactly the same, to how it was in Smite 1, mostly because it's such a huge immediate feels impact. But most of the stats, again, split up into 5 categories, and characters will have different spots in those 5 categories, depending on if they deserve to be in the very high health pool or the very low prots pool or, whatever it is. They all are different in that regard, but the general spread of stats from the very low to the very high is much, much, much smaller than it was in Smite 1, and that is, again, to kind of increase the diversity. You could play Ymir mid if you want to, because he's not, that much less damaging than everybody else. But he is a little bit more tanky than everybody else. That's kind of the point of having a little bit of difference in stats, is so that you have a little bit of a different experience every game, but you aren't playing, the exact same character every single time, the exact same base.
Cool. All right, my question is, can Smite 2 have mid-game changes to the map? Similar to Battlefield 4 Levolution back in the day.
That's a buzzword I haven't heard in a while. So we have certainly talked about this, right? Initially, there was a pitch, not technically feasible, but there was an early pitch for Hecate that her ult would actually like bore holes through the map and change the geometry and stuff. I think the performance continues to be a big concern for us. Yeah. And the more things that you make dynamic about a big map like you have in Smite 2, where one of the things about like Smite as a MOBA is that a lot of the map needs to be relevant to you at any given time because people can come from any direction and whatnot. And like it is difficult to do massive game-changing things in a way that would be performant.
Yeah, I do want to just stop you for a second.
Yes.
When we say relevant, that means it like is actively loaded
yes,
on your
yeah.
computer.
Sorry.
Like your computer is actively processing that information, not like it's important.
Yes. And like you're not processing literally the entire map at a time, but it's much more of a map than like you'd be processing in a single player game or in a multiplayer game that doesn't have minions moving and like there's just a lot of things going on. Anyway, I will say we are talking about like where we take Conquest from here. And I think there are really interesting, I don't want to say it like evolutions and changes that can happen through the course of a map that we can do in a way that is performant and we're talking about for the future. But in terms of like huge things getting destroyed or the map completely changing, it's probably too far away from what we can do well from a performance standpoint.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, we got our one more questions out of the way. Alex touched on it earlier, but we do have another show coming up right after this. Lermy's going to keep hanging out because we have a SMITE 1 update headed to the Battleground next Tuesday, 11.12. So Lermy's going to be hanging out with J-Mac and Dandy going over the SMITE 1 patch notes. Chat, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Again, we'll be keeping an eye out for all your feedback on the balance stuff.
Maybe more flash tests today.
Maybe,
watch the Discord,
Yeah, keep an eye on our Discord, social media channels for flash test SMITE 2 info. Sorry, that's a tongue twister. But until then, we will see you all on the Battleground. Stay tuned if you want to hear more about the next SMITE 1 update coming to live servers. But we will see you all next week for Titan Talk. So hope everyone has a great weekend. Until then, peace.
Thank you.